What's your greatest regret? My greatest regret is that I spent 12 years trying to become someone my father would finally be proud of. The funny part? He never actually asked me to become that person. I just misunderstood him for most of my life. Growing up, my dad was obsessed with one thing: success. But to him, success had a very specific look: a business suit, a corner office, a fancy car, and preferably a job title that made people at family reunions say, wow. So from the time I was 7, Dad decided I was going to become a lawyer. Not a question, not a suggestion. Apparently, I had the face for arguing. Every Christmas, while other kids got dolls and video games, I got things like books about famous court cases. For my 10th birthday, Dad gave me a leather briefcase. A leather briefcase. I was 10. I carried crayons in it. When I was 12, he started making me watch courtroom documentaries with him every Friday night. Other kids were watching cartoons. I was learning how to object. At family dinners, Dad would randomly start arguments just so I could practice debating. Why should we get dessert? Why do you deserve a later bedtime? Convince me your brother is responsible enough to own a hamster. My brother hated that one. By high school, I was exhausted. Because the truth was, I didn't want to be a lawyer. I wanted to design clothes. I loved fashion. I filled notebooks with sketches. I could spend hours sewing old shirts into completely different outfits. But every time Dad found one of my designs, he'd say the same thing: that can be a hobby. So I stopped showing him, and I started preparing for law school. For 3 years, I did everything he wanted: debate club, mock trial, student government, internships. Then one afternoon, I finally snapped. If Dad wanted a future lawyer, fine. I was going to become the most ridiculous lawyer in human history. The next morning, I came downstairs wearing one of Dad's old suits. It was huge. The sleeves covered my hands. I added a fake mustache. Dad stared at me. What are you wearing? My future. Mom immediately left the room because she was trying not to laugh. From that day on, I objected to everything. Pass the salt. Objection. Leading the witness. Take out the trash. On what grounds? You need to clean your room. Can you prove I don't enjoy living like this? Dad was not amused. At school, I started referring to teachers as Your Honor. I carried a toy gavel in my backpack. During lunch, I'd slam it on the table and yell, "Court is now in session." My friends loved it. My teachers did not. Then came the science fair. I was supposed to build a working experiment. Instead, I put a volcano on trial. My presentation was called The People versus Mount St. Helens. I stood in front of the class and argued that the volcano was guilty of reckless destruction. My best friend played the defense attorney. The baking soda eruption was Exhibit A. My teacher gave me a B- and wrote, "Creative but deeply concerning." Dad got the email. That night, he sat me down. "Are you trying to make some kind of point?" I looked him right in the eyes. Objection. He stared at me. I stared back. Mom started laughing so hard she had to sit down. Dad didn't speak to me for almost a minute. Then he said, "You really don't want to be a lawyer, do you?" And for some reason, that was the hardest question I'd ever been asked, because I expected anger, disappointment, another lecture about throwing away my future. Instead, I started crying. I told him everything. About the fashion sketches, about the clothes I secretly made, about how every time he called it just a hobby. I felt like he was telling me the thing I loved didn't matter. Dad was quiet. Then he stood up and walked away. I thought I'd finally done it. I thought I'd completely disappointed him. But 10 minutes later, he came back carrying something I'd never seen before: a cardboard box. Inside were dozens of my old drawings. Every sketch I'd ever thrown away. Every terrible dress design. Every crumpled page I thought no one had cared about. He'd saved them all. He looked at me and said, "I thought pushing you toward law would give you a secure future." Then he picked up one of my sketches. "But I think I've been so worried about you failing that I forgot to notice what you're already good at." That summer, he helped me turn our garage into a tiny sewing studio. Mom called it the law office. Dad refused to laugh. 10 years later, I opened my own clothing boutique. At the grand opening, Dad showed up wearing a suit I designed myself, which was hilarious because he'd spent 30 years wearing the same boring gray suits. When I asked how he liked it, he adjusted the collar and said, "Well, I object to the price." I laughed. Then I reminded him that technically, he'd raised the lawyer in me after all, just not the kind he expected.